Hi, everyone,
Hello, everybody.
and welcome back to the Pretty Guilty podcast.
Yes, we're glad you're back. And once again, we say
Once
this
again,
every
glad
week.
to be back. Yeah.
Like, wow, they came back again. Yay. Yay
It's a
for us.
great day when you guys are here with us.
Honestly, it is.
All right, today we're going to talk about the Kohberger case. We have updates in the pretrial hearings, and
A lot of updates today,
I
actually.
feel like not a lot of people are talking about what they talked about in court today.
It's so funny because I feel like everybody seemed like it was anticlimactic, but it actually gave us a little bit more of an insight into what the defense's strategy, what the state strategy is as well. And a lot of exclusions requested by the defense. Of course, they're throwing everything at the wall just to kind of see what's going to stick.
But we're throwing everything.
It was like an 8-hour hearing. It was a long, long hearing and trying. But actually, the judge did a really good job at moving it forward. Each motion, there were just so many motions why it was so long. It was I felt like it was handled well moving forward. Some of the items the judge ruled on the issues. And some of them actually, he said he's going to take under advisement. So is there one in particular that you thought, like, you want to start with?
I have so many things to say. I feel as though it's really important to show both sides of it. And talking about this pretrial hearing, it's going to be information that both the defense and the prosecution brought to court, which we think it's important that you guys have all the facts. So one thing I thought that was very interesting that they talked a lot about was one of the key witnesses, Dylan Mortensen. I thought it was very interesting what the defense had to say about.
Yeah, she is the key witness because she's the only eyewitness.
She's the only surviving
Witness, yes.
That saw the intruder in the home.
When you hear them talking about that in court, think about the pressure that she has mounted on top of her, that she was the only surviving, not only is she a victim, but she's the only surviving person who actually saw something that could possibly help in this case. And then to have her recollection really just shredded by the defense. They're trying to put a lot of doubt into that, which that's their job, right? That's what they're trying to do, is create doubt. And then you have the state who's essentially saying, no, everything that she remembers is spot on, which that's not accurate either. So it really is an argument back and forth. But I thought so interesting when we see the state and the defense in court, they really want to portray that they're playing on an even field, and they're really not, because they don't want to act like, oh, I'm not doing this to be petty. No, you are.
Truly nitpicky.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Dylan in this hearing.
Okay.
And what they had to say about it. I personally feel as though the most interesting chunk of the hearing was regarding Dylan's possible testimony and her recollection of events, because and again, we see little bits of the truth that come out, right? And before trial, we don't know, we don't have everything, we don't have the full story. So as these court hearings are coming about, we're getting more information, because everything has been a lot of speculation up until now. So we know that Dylan said that she saw the intruder. We know he had bushy eyebrows, and that was pretty much it for a while. And then
Correct.
We got more information that she saw that he was wearing a mask, what kind of mask, the vacuum that he was holding.
Which they actually didn't reference the vacuum in the hearing, which I thought was interesting. Mainly the portion of what they were arguing today, as far as the defense is concerned, is that they wanted to try and exclude any of the 911 call that was made, the text messages, and they really talked a lot about her perception of what she saw, because they're trying to discredit her reliability as far as they were drunk. And actually, it was the first time we've got a glimpse into how drunk these girls actually probably were.
There's a thing called a Borg that is
I didn't know what that was. I was like, what? I was like, did they say a Borg? Clearly I've not had that drink, but they say hard alcohol with flavoring in it.
It's half water, half alcohol with some type of flavoring, such as liquid IV or a Mio or a flavor enhancer. If you guys know any differently,
let us know. Right. Clarification on what it is. Sure. Well, they did reference it that she did it as a drinking contest. So she started with the mimosas in the morning, had 9 White Claw drinks from the morning time. And then in the evening, before she went back home, that's when she drank the Borg in a drinking contest. Now, I guess a drinking contest is subject to interpretation, right? Because when we think of a drinking contest, I mean, I did plenty of drinking contests in high school, which I think she was actually a lot more forthcoming than I even realized about how much she had had to drink, and pretty much admitted to the officers, the investigators, that they were all pretty drunk. I don't think at any point they were, evasive in the sense of saying, "Oh, we just had maybe a few drinks." They were actually talking about how much they had to drink, how drunk they were, and that played into some of the information that she did provide when she was first interviewed.
One thing that the defense really did challenge in court was not just how drunk she was, but how she didn't remember. And she says that she didn't remember what he looked like. And the defense feels as though Dylan was coerced into talking about the mask, the baklava.
Baklava. Like, no, let's say this 5 times fast. Baklava.
Yeah, baklava. I really say it 1 time slow.
Yeah, so that was an interesting aspect too, because we saw the drawing, right? The sketch that she did of that baklava. And now we find out that actually it does somewhat feel like coercion, because in the hearing, they mentioned that the investigator actually, when she was describing what she saw and the mask, and then they essentially brought that up, the baklava, and then showed her a picture of it, and then asked her to draw it after they showed the picture.
Yeah.
So essentially the defense is saying that they planted that in her mind. And so is that reliable testimony?
Well, you also have to remember the mindset that Dylan must be in. She's probably extremely scared. She's being questioned by police. She's confused. She's just terrified. What a terrifying experience to be the only eyewitness of the person who just did this to your roommates. And so then she's being questioned by cops, and it can be a lot of pressure for someone who's very young and vulnerable and traumatized and scared and being questioned.
We finally got insight into how Dylan was feeling in that moment, because there's been a lot of speculation since this happened, that people were assuming, trying to basically determine how she felt, which is a lot of pressure for her because she's behind the scenes. Today in the hearing, they spoke about her being in a dream state of mind, frozen shock,
fuzzy, cloudy, like wearing blurry glasses. And the defense says that makes her unreliable.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it makes her unreliable?
I think I see both sides. I see both sides of where the prosecution is saying, this is our eyewitness, and she's describing, Bryan Kohberger. And then the defense is saying, she didn't even know if he was 3 feet or 10 feet away from her. She didn't know if he was in front of her or if he was walking out the door. She couldn't tell his eye color. She couldn't tell us, when the police showed her a picture of Bryan Kohberger, she said, I don't know if that's him or not. So they're saying she's unreliable, which I understand. But at the same time, the state is saying, but this is our star witness and she saw him, and maybe she's in shock and she's blocking out the memories. And then the defense is saying, well, if
she
people
couldn't even identify him, which is the problem, because then she says she only saw him for 1 second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So in that split second, she's not able to identify him off a photo. And then we learned that she actually did not even provide the information on the bushy eyebrows independently. That she spoke with investigators and they asked about the eyes, the eye color, and then they asked about the bushy eyebrows, which I thought was interesting. Do you know what I thought actually watching that is, do you where did they get the bushy eyebrows from? I think actually when they spoke about it in the hearing, they asked her, what did the eyebrows look like? But let's not forget, in her room, remember, describe what's in her room.
She has illustrations of different shapes and sizes of eyebrows.
So they see this in her room and see that this is something that she does, like she sketches and draws, and it sounds like a plethora of them, right? So then did they get that idea and then plant it in her mind? I don't know. It seems very weird to me.
The defense is arguing coercion, and they're saying that they coerced her into talking about the eyebrows, and she didn't say anything about a baklava. Is that how you say it? Did I say it right?
I know. I always say fast 5 times baklava,
but they're
I
saying
think
that
so.
that she didn't say it, and then they had asked her about it, and then they showed her a picture of it, and then they made her draw a photo.
Then they asked her to sketch it. I mean, see, that's the problem that I have is would she have sketched that on her own in that exact manner? Although she did kind of describe it that way.
To Bethany, she said he's wearing like a ski mask that covered his that only showed his eyes and mouth, or covered his forehead and mouth.
Right.
That's what it was. He was wearing a mask that covered his forehead and mouth. And
I think they're pinpointing the unreliability because they want certain parts of the 911 call, certain parts of her identifying him to be excluded, and the text messages. They want some of this to be excluded from being, provided to the jury as evidence.
Yeah.
At the end of all of this, we know that the state has their argument, the defense has theirs.
Yeah.
I guess really the judge said it best. He referenced gumbo. The basis of what the judge said is you make gumbo soup. You put all of the ingredients into a pot, and at the end of the day, it's whether they like it or not.
Whether the jury likes it.
Correct. In reference to the jury, whether they like it or not. So the state's going to put all of their ingredients in. Is the jury going to like their soup, or are they going to like the defense's soup better? It was very odd, but I get his point on what he says. Take the, I guess, graphic nature of this tragedy aside, when you look at the basis of the criminal justice system, and that really is the crux of it. So I don't disagree with what he's saying. It was just
jarring,
sort of blunt, I think, in a situation like this. But he's got both sides coming at him too, and he has to make these arguments. So
both sides are going to argue their side, right? Which leads us into talking about the 911 call, and the text messages and the phone activity, because that was a big topic in the court hearing today as well.
It really was. The 911 call was interesting, getting some further information about when Dylan actually called the neighbors. We've got cat number 2 in here today. About when Dylan actually had called the neighbors, Emily and Hunter, right?
They were on the 911 call.
Right. They were the ones on the 911 call. So they called them when they were concerned and had them come over to the house.
They called them about 10 minutes before the 911 call came through. They called them over to the house, which one of my biggest personally questions about, well, I have a lot actually, but
a lot, I would say,
when it comes to confusion, I'm confused because in one of the court documents, it says that Hunter discovered Xana and Ethan and then told the roommates to call 911. However, on the 911 call, we hear Hunter in the background knocking on the door, discovering both Xana and Ethan. And we have Steve Gonzalez come out in an interview with News Nation, and he says that pretty much that Hunter told him exactly that in the 911 call, you can hear him discovering Xana and Ethan, but the court documents say that he told police that he discovered Xana and Ethan and then told the roommates to call 911, which the call came through as an unconscious person, which is why I am a tad bit confused. That would bring confusion to anyone because the timeline isn't really making sense given the document versus the 911 call, which are both supposed to be factual. So speaking of confusion, that brings me into the next thing about Dylan that I thought was very interesting. Something that Dylan said during one of her 5 interrogations that she had.
Right. And I mean, I don't know that I would even call them interrogations, would you? They were maybe interviews. Yes.
I mean, to her, I'm sure it felt like interrogation.
Oh my goodness, I bet it probably did. Everybody's deemed a suspect until they find who did it. So they although they didn't separate everybody.
That was another thing. Yes. Okay, we're getting off on a tangent here, but I need to get this off of my chest. Right. That's another thing is then they went and put all the witnesses in a hotel room together to then corroborate their stories, which if you have nothing to hide, it's fine. And I'm not saying that they did. I'm just saying that proper protocol would not be to put all the witnesses,
they didn't separate
the two key witnesses together in a hotel room and not separate them. This is
and I think that I don't know if they necessarily paid for the hotel room, but what they didn't do is everybody from that house, meaning the 2 victims and then Hunter and Emily, they didn't separate any of them. They let them come down to the police station together, stay in a hotel together, essentially just hang out together, which at this point, everybody's a suspect. Why are they allowing...
This is, hours, days
Right.
after the crime. They don't know who's responsible for this.
Right. But then again, they are not detained, so they really have the right to roam, I
To do
guess,
whatever they
free
want.
for sure. So there's that component too as well. It's kind of a slippery slope for sure.
Absolutely.
But I was surprised that at least the first 24 hours, I mean, what did we always talk about? The first 48 hours, they're so important. And they didn't separate any of them, which I really thought that was kind of odd as well, to at least get all their interviews completed so they don't have time to cooperate. Not that they were. That's not what we're inferencing here. But again, it goes back to poor investigation.
Absolutely.
Correct. Which we're seeing so much on these cases.
Absolutely.
There's so many people are going to get, if you're guilty, you're going to get acquitted because of it or wrongfully convicted.
If you're innocent. Yeah,
Correct,
absolutely. Yes. So let's get back on track to what we were talking about with Dylan.
Yes. So she was talking about how she expressed during these interviews that she was afraid, but then the defense was saying that she also contradicts herself because she said that while she was afraid, she also thought everything was okay because Anna was simply just passed out on the floor. And when we hear that, I'm thinking, at what point, like, where did she get this inference that she was passed out on the floor? Because if they're home, I would think that she's in bed sleeping, especially Ethan's there. They're probably, cuddled up in bed. I know I would be.
Well, and you think it's the middle of the night. This isn't the middle of the day at 2 p.m. So to say that she just figured that she was safe because Xana was passed out on the floor is such a particular thing to say. Because
Correct.
if she was passed out from drinking too much, surely it would be in bed. So where did this inference?
Excuse
wow. So where did this preconceived notion come from that Xana was passed out on the floor? Especially because that's where Xana's body ended up lying, was on the floor.
It gives a perception that she saw more than what we're led to believe.
It's
that
just
she
a
saw,
very
that she observed.
specific thing to say,
Correct.
given the circumstances, and
Right.
that's what I thought was interesting.
And then sometimes, you look at these things and we're thinking, are we hyper analyzing them? But so I don't know. It was just a kind of an odd thing that they had pointed out today in the hearing too, as well. But just another aspect to it that we don't really know. At the end of the day, the 911 call is going to be taken under advisement because the judge has to take into consideration the hearsay rule when it comes to Hunter and Emily, especially Emily on the 911 call where she talks about, and they said that there was a man in their house last night. That's technically hearsay. She didn't see it. She only heard it from them and is passing on information to the 911 operator. So I presume there's going to be some exclusion to that, I would think.
I do believe that there will be a lot of hearsay from a lot of witnesses that won't be allowed in. That, to be honest, some of the best information comes from those type of interactions with people in the town. I've personally had interactions with people who live in Moscow that have told me very interesting things that I've never really disclosed online because I don't want to feed into anything that's not factual. But it's very interesting when you have boots on the ground and you're hearing from people from the town what they have to say.
Correct.
However, a lot of that stuff, A, never came out in the media, and B, definitely won't come out at trial. So I think that there's a lot of hearsay that we won't hear. I think some of it is true, and then some of it just it tends to be like a game of telephone, which is why they don't allow it in court.
And they have Yik Yak where you can go on anonymously and follow a herd. I mean, honestly,
so is a wild thing.
It honestly is such a wild thing. The other side to that, actually, and the judge did address it, and he's not wrong. He told the defense and the state, given this generation essentially of these young kids and how they communicated so different than how we communicated, back when we were teenagers. Meaning me, not you. That I know of. No, I was kidding. Just joking.
When Siri, no, I'm just kidding.
I know, right?
ChatGPT. When was it formed?
But it's anonymous. You're not supposed to say that you're on it, right?
Oh my goodness.
Anyways, but the judge was talking about the fact that Dylan and Bethany, their activity after the events, the Instagram, I almost said YouTube, the Instagram, the Snapchat, all of that this is how this generation communicates, where, I used to pick up a phone and make a phone call to make plans. Now it is through these platforms that they communicate through.
Well, I can't help but wonder, not every person is so into law, true crime, or things of the such. I do wonder how many people didn't realize that Snapchats don't disappear forever. That
It's true.
people, the police can access those type of records. And it makes me wonder if we will see any Snapchats that people thought would never be seen again about this particular thing, if we'll have those come out at court at all. I mean, maybe not, but I definitely think that would be interesting. I remember being that young and knowing a lot of things I remember being that young and not knowing a lot of things in life. So, I mean, them thinking that they could Snapchat and that it wouldn't be traceable is pretty much on track with a young person and their thought process. So it'll be really interesting to see what comes out in court in the Snapchat particular area. Also, if any data has been deleted on any side, whether that's the roommates, whether that's any witnesses, whether that's Kohberger, something that has been deleted that person didn't think would be seen. I love stuff like that because
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I love catching you in a lie. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to talk through more rapidly, not rapid fire, but we're going to talk through a couple of the other points that we heard in court that we feel are important to bring up, but we don't have enough time to go in grave detail about all of it.
Yes,
so
there's a lot to go through for sure.
Yeah, we want to touch on the DNA topic because there were 3 DNA profiles that were found under Maddie's nails that came back to no one, including Kohberger. And so they were talking about how that DNA couldn't have been the perpetrator because of the way that he was dressed, that even if she had put up a fight, because I'm not certain if she did or not, but even if she had put up a fight, that his DNA wouldn't have been found under her fingernails.
Which it wouldn't have transferred, which makes me believe, well, he was wearing gloves, correct?
From what I know.
From what I understand, yeah. And that would make sense on why, because they said the way he was clothed, the way he was dressed, they didn't specify to it, but that was an interesting aspect. So that was the state's argument on it as far as, well, it wouldn't have come up from him anyway. So that's their way
Even if it was Kohberger.
Right.
It wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Right. Correct. And so they were talking about that today. I think the judge has taken some of that under advisement. The traffic stop was something else too, as well. The defense is really wanting to use the traffic stop the state is really wanting to use the traffic stop as a way to identify Kohberger to the jury. The defense really is arguing against that because one of the things is the vehicle. The defense says you can't identify fully that that's his vehicle, maybe the one he's driving, but they're also going to try and use that in photos of surveillance footage showing that he was driving that vehicle in different locations. But essentially the defense is saying, listen, those were like Bigfoot sightings in some of these videos. There's only one video that they have where they can identify that it's similar to the Hyundai Elantra.
Well, and remember, the defense isn't saying that Kohberger wasn't out at the time that the state is saying. So it's hard because this is, again, one of those points where say it's a coincidence that Kohberger just so happens to be out late at night during the exact time that this crime is happening and his car is pictured. But also on the defense side, it's a common white colored sedan. It's not this bright blue that you would spot a mile away. I see, I guess, both sides being argued where the defense is saying, well, you saw photos of the vehicle, but they weren't distinguishable photos to say 100% with certainty that that was Kohberger's car. But the state is saying, what are the chances that he's out during this time? And you guys are taking responsibility saying he was out. You see both sides.
Well, you see both sides of it. The problem is that they're trying to lead the jury down a path that is really not fair to lead them down because they're trying to convince them this is his car. This is his car. His car was here, 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 and here. And so you can presume that since this is his vehicle in all these locations that he's guilty, right? But there's times that we're out doing cases, following individuals. They have a white car. Yeah. They've got a Toyota Camry. It's and number one, white is the most popular color of a vehicle, right?
Most common color.
Most common. And so we have to do our due diligence when we're supposed to be following them and we're allowed to be up close to them. You imagine all these pictures and videos of this vehicle, these white vehicles all over the place. Jurors sometimes can get into that mindset of, well, they said it's his. It must be his.
Well, we see it with the media.
Correct.
They said it was a white Elantra, and everybody said, okay. And they said it's Kohberger's white Elantra, and everybody said, okay. As an investigator standpoint, for me, when I see these photos, I don't think that's the car.
That's not the smoking gun of the vehicle, for sure.
It's not the smoking gun for sure, especially in this case.
Also a college town too as well. You think about how many people are out all hours of the night.
It's not a big town. See,
No,
so
but
then you see
but there's
both
a lot of white
sides.
cars, I'm sure.
There's a lot of white cars.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
But then it's a small town. But then it's a very specific time frame. But then also it's a time frame on a Saturday where a lot of cars. So it's you can see both sides.
But it's one component, right? So
100%.
what they're trying to say is these white vehicles were out. This is what he looks like. He has the bushy eyebrows. He has this, and so it's essentially trying to paint this. Oops,
You're putting a puzzle together.
Correct. And so then if they can get them to believe every single puzzle piece, or at least 75% of the puzzle pieces, then they think that they've got their gumbo soup, as the judge would say.
But then on the opposite, where the defense, all they need is they just need a little bit of doubt in the jury's mind.
Yes. So at the end of the day, the judge is going to allow the traffic stop in to identify Kohberger. Essentially, that's his vehicle. So they will know that he has a Hyundai Elantra. What the judge is not going to allow in is any of the information of the police officer asking his phone number, certain questions of that nature, but it's only going to be able to use as identity purposes only. And so that's how they're going to, I think, get around that. And just hope that one of the things we have to remember too is that if the judge does not allow certain evidence to come in, but if the state or if the defense messes up and at any time any of them opens the door, then it's fair game. Absolutely. And so they have to be very calculated to not open that door, because once they do, then whatever side did open that door, the other one is able to come back and rebuttal. And then that's when information, evidence is allowed to be opened up and let in when it wasn't supposed to be.
The side that argues against, we don't want this in, sometimes they slip up, and then they're the ones that let that door open. Right. And it's even worse when it's your own team that does it to yourself.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So
truly.
Bad. Just the last two things real quick, and then we will wrap it up. The use of the words psychopath, sociopath, and murder. And there was a lot of argument back and forth between how those words are able to be used. So the judge ruled that sociopath, psychopath cannot be used. Murder can be used in opening arguments, as it has to be to describe, the charges and then the charging document as well. So those would be the only times that they can use the word murder. They cannot use it for witnesses or anything of that nature, which I think that's fair. The families of the defense being allowed in the courtroom or not, the state doesn't want them in. They want to preserve them as witnesses. And so therefore they're saying that they should not be allowed to be in the courtroom. And the defense says, listen, they are essentially victims too. They're a casualty of this. They didn't tell their son to do this if he were to be guilty. They didn't want any of this for their family. And the defense is asking for compassion for his family. The state said that they're only going to call just a few of the family members. And the judge says, why can't you interview them first, put them on the stand? I guess not really interview, but why can't you put them on the stand first? I understand it's not your narrative and it doesn't go along with what you want to do. But at the same time, it is important as well for the defense to have their family support. The state actually agreed and said, well, if it were the difference of them being allowed to be in the courtroom and hear testimony and then testify, or them being put on the stand first, we would take them being on the stand first. The judge is like, so be it. That's what's going to happen. So
yeah. I do think that this judge is tougher for sure, especially on the defense, which I'm not mad at it. Because the problem with the defense is you give them an inch, they're going to take it a mile. They want to get away with as much as they possibly can. So I like someone who's kind of calling them out on their nitpicky and just kind of the petty little games that go on in court. He's a bit more straightforward and to the point, and I do appreciate that when it comes to court.
I do think that he actually has been somewhat equal with the state too.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I do feel like he has been somewhat equal with the state too as well. I mean, he called them out on some of their stuff. And so it was kind of, I thought, somewhat fair. Yeah, I think it was kind of balanced. I mean, definitely a little bit probably harder on the defense. What I did like in the hearing, though, is they actually talked things out. Mm-hmm. It was really interesting, as if they were like having this family meeting and the sisters and brothers were fighting. Yeah. And then there's dad over there. So that aspect you don't see a lot when you watch these hearings. And the defense is going to bring in additional perpetrators. The judge has allowed that as long as they can prove correct. The last thing, I promise, I know we said two more things, but the last thing is that the judge actually is allowing the state to use a mock-up as a dollhouse
a dollhouse
of the
remake
house. Yeah, that he actually did allow that in, even though the defense argued heavily against it. I feel like in this case, it's not as big of a factor. When you have a case where distance is a problem,
Absolutely.
like when you're doing an investigation and let's say for an accident, you're trying to decide what the distance was, and you're trying to reconstruct it, that's a lot different. In this, I don't think it's the make it or break it of the case.
No, I mean, I think the only distance would be Dylan seeing the perpetrator. But again, I don't know that that's going to make or break the testimony because there are other factors that I believe would break that testimony, given her intoxicated state of mind, her, lucid dreams. Was she I mean, I feel like if there was going to be something that would make or break her testimony, it would be that, not really as much of the distance. It would be if Dylan said that she saw him walking down a hill far away, that could be a bit more problematic.
I think it's important because that floor plan was a really weird floor plan.
Very unique floor plan.
It is. So that's why I think it's important, because we've seen renditions of the floor plan and it's very kind of weird, especially when they're talking about the stairwell.
Yeah. And I think that it also, in the defenses, I mean, it could go in a way for the defense to say, well, you guys said Bryan Kohberger has never been in this house, but how would he know where everybody was at? Clearly, whoever did this crime had to have been in this house, given the rare form of the floor plan. And it could be in favor of the defense. That's why I said, for me, I'm not thinking that it's more for the prosecution or the defense. I think both people can use it in their arguments, and I think it would be very interesting to hear both sides.
But at the end of the day, if it's going to help the jurors understand the case, that's
all that matters.
That's all that matters, and that's what's important. And I think it will definitely help the jurors. So
yeah, what side it'll help more, I don't know. But what I will tell you is I can't wait to finally get a little bit more clarity on certain things, just overall in this case. So cutting this off is truly torture. So we're sad to see you guys go, but tune into our next episode. We're covering Karen Read. We're actually going to do a really in-depth timeline of Karen Read and everything that we have going on. And well, not we have, but they have going on, also with live updates. But we want to do a bit more, less of reporting, more of an in-depth, really look at the case and maybe look with a fine-tooth comb and see if there's anything that we find that we want to talk about.
And the differences between the first trial and the second trial. The second trial opening arguments were supposed to start Tuesday, which I don't think that may happen at this point because they're still waiting for a few more jurors. But we're definitely taking a deeper dive into this case, and especially because some of the witnesses and evidence are going to be a little bit different in this trial as well, which is
absolutely
to see the different components will be very interesting. But thanks for coming by and hanging out with us again, and hopefully you got some coffee, some BJs.
Okay, guys, we'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to like, subscribe the video, catch us on all of our socials linked down below. And if you guys have any questions,